The little boy had no idea that a single piece of buried paper would heal a heart that had been broken for 50 long years. Hello there, my friends. Come in, come in. The fire is warm and the tea is just poured. Settle down into your favorite chair. If you enjoy stories that warm the heart and leave you with a valuable lesson, subscribe to Nanny Granny's Golden Tales and become part of our storytelling family. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love reading every comment. Our story begins in the sleepy cobblestone village of Willow Creek, a place where time seemed to move just a little bit slower than the rest of the world. In a small, drafty cottage at the very edge of the village lived a 10-year-old boy named Leo. Leo and his mother, Clara, did not have much at all. Their clothes were heavily patched at the elbows and knees, and their dinners often consisted of nothing more than watered-down vegetable broth and a crust of day-old bread. Yet, despite their empty cupboards and cold floorboards, their little home was absolutely overflowing with love. Clara worked from the moment the sun peeked over the horizon until the stars painted the night sky. She spent her days scrubbing floors, washing linens, and mending clothes for the wealthier families in town. Through all the back-breaking labor, she never lost her gentle, comforting smile. "Wealth isn't measured by the shiny coins in your pocket, my brave Leo," she would often tell him, kneeling down to smooth his messy brown hair. "It is measured by the kindness and courage you hold in your heart." One brisk autumn afternoon, the wind was howling through the streets of Willow Creek, carrying the crisp, sharp scent of fallen pine needles and distant wood smoke. Leo was out gathering fallen branches to keep their small fireplace burning through the night. His worn-out boots crunched softly over the frost-kissed grass as he made his way toward the highest hill in town. At the very top of this hill stood the great oak. It was a massive, ancient tree with sprawling, thick branches that looked like giant protective arms reaching up to touch the heavens. The townsfolk rarely went near the great oak anymore because it sat directly on the property line of the old Blackwood estate. Everyone in Willow Creek knew the rumors about Elias Blackwood. He was a deeply wealthy, fiercely reclusive old man with a permanent scowl and a heart rumored to be as cold and hard as stone. Grown adults would lower their voices when speaking of him, and children would cross the street entirely just to avoid walking past his tall, imposing iron gates. But little Leo was entirely focused on his task, shivering slightly in his thin coat. He knelt at the base of the great oak, reaching his arm into a dark, hollow space between two enormous, gnarled roots to grab a thick piece of firewood. As his small fingers brushed against the damp, chilly earth, he felt something hard and incredibly smooth. It certainly wasn't wood. It felt like cold, solid metal. Highly curious, Leo dropped his bundle of sticks and dug his hands deep into the dirt, vigorously pushing aside decades of green moss, rocks, and packed soil. He pulled out a small, heavily rusted iron box. It was no bigger than a standard brick, completely covered in a thick layer of earthy grime, featuring a small brass latch that was almost entirely oxidized green. Leo's heart began to beat a little faster against his ribs. A hidden treasure? Could it be gold or silver coins that would finally allow his hard-working mother to rest her tired hands? With trembling, dirt-stained fingers, he pried at the stubborn latch. It resisted at first, tightly sealed shut by the relentless passage of time and weather, but with a sharp, sudden snap, it finally gave way. The metal hinges creaked a loud, protesting sigh as Leo slowly opened the heavy lid. Inside there was no gleaming gold. There were no precious jewels or shiny silver coins. There was only a folded piece of heavy, elegant parchment, severely yellowed and brittle at the edges, resting beside a beautifully intricate, deeply tarnished silver pocket watch. Leo gently picked up the watch and noticed that the delicate hands were perfectly frozen at exactly 8 o'clock. Leo carefully unfolded the delicate parchment, terrified it might crumble into dust. The ink had long faded to a pale, ghostly brown, written in an elegant, sweeping cursive handwriting. He squinted his eyes, softly reading the words aloud into the empty, chilly autumn air. "My dearest Elias," the letter began, "I have waited by the great oak for as long as I could bear the cold. They are forcing me to leave Willow Creek tonight. I begged my father for more time, but he will not hear a single word of it. If you love me as deeply as you swore you did, if our promises under these whispering branches meant anything to you at all, please find me. I will be staying with my aunt in the town of Rosewood. I am leaving you my beloved grandfather's watch, so you will forever know that my time is always yours. Yours completely and forever, Evelyn." Leo gasped out loud, a puff of white air escaping his lips. The date, neatly written at the very top of the letter, was exactly 50 years ago. And the name, Elias? Could it possibly be Elias Blackwood? The grumpy, terrifying old man locked away in the dark mansion? Leo securely clutched the fragile letter and the heavy silver watch to his chest, completely forgetting his firewood, and ran all the way down the hill toward his home. His boots pounded rhythmically against the dirt path, his lungs burning in the cold air. He violently burst through the flimsy door of their small cottage, just as his mother was hanging up a freshly washed patchwork quilt. "Mother! Mother! You must look at what I found under the great oak!" Leo cried out breathlessly, gently placing the rusted box, the delicate pocket watch, and the fragile letter onto their scratched wooden dining table. Clara quickly dried her wet hands on her faded apron and carefully picked up the letter. As her eyes scanned the faded words, her kind expression softened drastically, and a deep, empathetic sigh escaped her lips. "Oh, my sweet Leo," she whispered softly, tracing the faded signature. "This is a profound heartbreak trapped inside a piece of paper. This poor, desperate woman and poor, lonely Mr. Blackwood." "Poor Mr. Blackwood?" Leo asked, aggressively tilting his head in sheer confusion. "But, Mother, absolutely everyone in the village says he's remarkably mean and cruel. Mr. Higgins the baker says he chased a stray dog away with his cane just for barking near his stone fence." Clara gracefully sat down on a wooden chair, pulling Leo close to her side. "People are rarely born cold and cruel, my sweet, brave boy. Sometimes, when a heart is shattered and left entirely untended, it freezes over with ice just to survive the agonizing pain of loss. If this metal box was buried 50 long years ago, it means Mr. Blackwood never received this letter. He must have spent his entire life believing his beloved simply abandoned him in the dark without a single word of goodbye." Leo slowly looked down at the tarnished silver pocket watch resting on the table. He vividly imagined a much younger Elias Blackwood, standing entirely alone by the great oak tree in the freezing cold, feeling completely betrayed and unloved. A heavy, uncomfortable knot formed deep inside the boy's stomach. "I have to give it to him, Mother," Leo stated firmly, his small hands balling into determined fists. I have to march up to the Blackwood estate and deliver this letter. Clara looked incredibly worried, gently biting her bottom lip. Mr. Blackwood does not take kindly to unexpected visitors, Leo. He might yell terribly at you. He might chase you away and frighten you. But if I don't try, he will never know the honest truth, Leo replied, looking up into his mother's eyes. You taught me just yesterday that kindness is our true wealth. I have to be kind to him, Mother, even if he chooses not to be kind to me. Clara smiled warmly, a single proud tear glistening in the corner of her eye. She leaned down and kissed his forehead. You have such a brave and beautiful soul, Leo. Go. Do what you know is right, but please be very careful. The very next morning, the sky above Willow Creek was a thick blanket of gray clouds, deeply threatening rain. Leo stood nervously before the towering, rusted iron gates of the Blackwood estate. The massive stone mansion beyond the gates looked exactly like a lonely, abandoned fortress, its grand, towering windows completely dark and uninviting. Wild, untamed ivy crawled aggressively up the stone walls, almost as if the earth was trying to swallow the gloomy house whole. If you're enjoying this story so far, please take a moment to like the video. It helps these stories reach more people who need a little inspiration today. Leo took a deep, steadying breath, tightly clutching the rusted metal box in his hands, and bravely pushed against the heavy iron gate. It squealed incredibly loudly, sharply announcing his arrival to the silent grounds. He walked up the long, sweeping gravel driveway, his small footsteps echoing loudly in the eerie, oppressive silence. When he finally reached the massive, carved oak front doors, he had to stand high up on his tiptoes just to reach the heavy brass knocker. He grabbed it and let it fall. Thud, thud, thud. Agonizing minutes passed. Absolutely nothing happened. Leo was just about to knock a second time when he heard the heavy, metallic sound of sliding deadbolts. The giant door groaned open just a tiny crack, and a pair of sharp, fiercely icy blue eyes peered out suspiciously from the dark shadows of the hallway. "What exactly do you want, boy?" A gravelly, harsh voice snapped like a whip. "I do not buy anything, and I certainly do not give handouts to beggars. Go away immediately before I summon the town constable." Leo swallowed hard, his knees knocking together and his hands shaking uncontrollably. I'm not a beggar, sir. Please, are you Mr. Elias Blackwood?" "Who is asking?" the old man growled deeply, opening the heavy door slightly wider. He was an exceptionally tall man, though slightly hunched over with advanced age, leaning heavily on a thick wooden cane topped with a silver eagle. His face was deeply lined with thick wrinkles of permanent bitterness. "My name is Leo, sir. I was gathering firewood up by the great oak tree yesterday afternoon, and I found something buried deep in the dirt. I strongly believe it belongs to you." Elias scowled fiercely, looking down his nose at the muddy, terribly rusted box resting in the boy's small hands. "Worthless trash pulled from the dirt. I do not want it. Take your dirty rubbish and leave my property at once." He grabbed the door handle and began to forcefully shut the door. "It's a letter from a lady named Evelyn," Leo blurted out as quickly as he could, closing his eyes tightly, bracing for the old man to yell. "She left a silver pocket watch. She said her time is always yours." The heavy door instantly stopped moving. The silence that followed was incredibly heavy. Slowly, agonizingly, the door swung entirely open. Elias Blackwood stood completely frozen like a statue, his icy blue eyes suddenly impossibly wide and entirely unfocused, the deep, fiery anger completely drained from his wrinkled face, rapidly replaced by a ghost-like, sickly paleness. What did you say?" Elias whispered, his voice trembling so violently that Leo almost missed the words entirely. "What name did you just say to me?" "Evelyn, sir," Leo repeated gently, opening his eyes and taking a tiny step forward. He opened the rusted lid of the box and carefully pulled out the yellowed, fragile parchment and the tarnished silver watch. He held them out toward the towering man. Elias completely let go of his wooden cane. It clattered incredibly loudly against the hard stone porch, but he didn't even seem to notice the noise. His large, heavily veined hands, heavily spotted with age and shaking uncontrollably, reached out toward the boy. He gingerly took the silver watch first. His thumb slowly, reverently brushed over the frozen metal hands. Then, with a shallow breath, he took the letter. As Elias silently read the faded brown ink, a profound, sacred silence fell completely over the vast estate. The absolute only sound was the rustling of the dry autumn leaves blowing across the overgrown lawn. Leo watched closely as the terrifying old man's harsh, bitter face entirely crumpled. 50 long years of boiling anger, 50 years of built-up protective ice, began to melt away in a single instant. A heavy, glistening tear rolled down Elias's wrinkled cheek, dropping heavily onto the parchment. She didn't leave me," Elias choked out, his knees completely giving way as he collapsed right there onto the hard stone porch. "She didn't just run away from me without a word. She waited. She waited for me in the cold. She left me this message, and I never even looked for her. Oh, heaven help my foolish soul. I thought she took my heart and threw it away. But she loved me. She truly loved me." Leo immediately knelt down beside the weeping, heartbroken old man and gently placed a small, warm hand on his trembling, broad shoulder. The boy didn't say anything at all. He simply sat there on the cold stone with him, offering a quiet, comforting presence as the old man sobbed for a lost lifetime. After what felt like an eternity, Elias slowly reached into his thick coat pocket and wiped his wet face with a monogrammed silk handkerchief. He finally looked at Leo, really looked deeply at the boy this time. The terrifying ice in his blue eyes was completely gone, completely replaced by a profound, agonizing sorrow. "I have spent my entire life deeply hating the world, young boy. I built these massive stone walls and iron gates to keep absolutely everyone out because I thought the only person I ever truly loved had cruelly mocked me. I have been a terrible fool, a cruel, bitterly lonely fool." "My mother says people aren't usually cruel on purpose," Leo said softly, offering a gentle smile. "She says sometimes hearts just freeze over to survive the terrible cold. But a frozen heart can always melt, Mr. Blackwood. Yours is melting right now." Elias stared deeply at the raggedly dressed, incredibly wise boy. "Who exactly is your mother, child? She must be a truly remarkable woman to raise such a boy." "Her name is Clara, sir. We live in the tiny cottage at the very edge of the village. She works very hard every single day, but we don't have very much money at all. We have lots and lots of love, though." Elias firmly gripped the tarnished silver watch tightly in his right fist. He slowly, painfully stood up, reaching down to retrieve his fallen cane. He looked far out toward the rusted gates of his massive estate, then slowly turned his gaze down the long road leading out toward the neighboring towns. A brand new, intense spark suddenly ignited in his blue eyes. It was not anger, it was fierce determination. "Leo," Elias said, his voice much stronger and deeper now. 50 long years ago, Evelyn wrote that she was being taken away to the town of Rosewood. Rosewood is only a 2-hour drive from here. I am an old, foolish, stubborn man, but I have a very fast car and I have a driver. I am going to Rosewood today, right now. Will you please come with me? I honestly do not think I have the courage to do this completely alone." Leo nodded his head enthusiastically, a huge grin spreading across his face. "Yes, sir, I will gladly go. Let me just run and tell my mother." Exactly 1 hour later, a sleek, beautifully polished black vintage car pulled up directly in front of Leo's tiny, drafty cottage. Clara rushed out, nervously wiping her wet hands on her faded apron, looking completely bewildered. Elias gracefully stepped out of the vehicle and politely tipped his expensive hat to her, respectfully asking for permission to take Leo on a matter of the utmost importance. Clara, immediately seeing the profound, soft change in the terrifying old man's eyes, happily agreed. The long drive to the town of Rosewood felt to Elias like it lasted an entire lifetime. He sat tensely in the luxurious back seat with Leo, anxiously turning the silver pocket watch over and over again in his trembling hands. He stared blankly out the window at the rapidly passing green countryside, completely lost in beautiful memories of a time when the world was young and entirely full of bright promise. When they finally arrived in the busy town of Rosewood, it took several frustrating hours of asking polite questions at the local post office and the bustling town hall. Finally, a very elderly, bespectacled clerk recognized the name immediately. Evelyn had never married another man. She lived quietly in a small, beautifully neat cottage at the very end of a quiet, tree-lined lane, completely surrounded by a magnificent garden of blooming white roses. As the black car slowly pulled up to the picturesque cottage with the white roses, Elias's hands began to shake violently once again. He couldn't even bring himself to reach for the door handle. He looked frantically at Leo, sheer panic clearly visible in his wide eyes. "What if she doesn't even remember me, Leo? What if she rightfully hates me for never coming to find her? It has been 50 years. 50 whole years." Leo smiled brightly and comfortingly patted the terrified old man's hand. "If she gave you her beloved grandfather's watch, it means her time is always yours. She promised you forever, sir. You have to be brave and find out." Gathering absolutely every single ounce of courage he had left in his old bones, Elias slowly stepped out of the car. He walked up the uneven cobblestone path, leaning heavily on his wooden cane. Leo followed quietly, just a few steps behind. Elias reached the front porch, hesitated for one agonizing second, and knocked gently on the white wooden door. The door slowly creaked open. Standing directly in the doorway was a frail but incredibly beautiful elderly woman with soft snow-white hair and incredibly kind, bright eyes. She wore a simple elegant blue dress, and a small metal gardening trowel was held loosely in her left hand. She looked curiously at the immensely tall, well-dressed old man standing on her porch, her brow furrowing in gentle confusion. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked in a soft, musical voice. Elias completely lost his ability to speak. The heavy words violently caught in his dry throat. Instead of speaking, he slowly reached into his thick wool coat pocket with a heavily trembling hand and pulled out the tarnished silver pocket watch. He held it out directly to her, resting gently in the flat palm of his shaking hand. Evelyn gasped loudly, stepping backward. The metal gardening trowel completely slipped from her hand, clattering loudly onto the wooden porch. She stared in absolute shock at the silver watch, then very slowly raised her beautiful eyes to look deeply into the deeply lined, sorrowful face of the man standing right before her. Tears immediately, rapidly welled up in her eyes. "Elias?" she whispered, her gentle voice violently breaking with emotion. Is it truly you?" "I found your hidden letter, my sweet Evelyn," Elias openly cried, heavy tears streaming freely and unashamedly down his wrinkled face. "I found it only today. I didn't know. I swear to you I never knew. I foolishly thought you had left me behind. I am so incredibly sorry. I am so desperately sorry. It took me a lifetime to come and find you." Evelyn did not need to hear another single word. She immediately stepped forward and threw her arms tightly around the tall old man, burying her tear-stained face deep into his shoulder. Elias dropped his wooden cane, wrapping his arms around her waist, hugging her back with a fierce, desperate strength, holding her as if he was terrified she would vanish into thin air. 50 long years of agonizing separation, of terrible misunderstanding, of terribly lonely nights and bitter days, entirely dissolved into nothingness, right there on the sunny front porch. Little Leo stood quietly back near the steps, happily watching them, a massive, brilliant smile lighting up his young face. He felt a beautiful, glowing warmth deep in his chest that had absolutely nothing to do with the sun finally breaking through the heavy gray clouds. He knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that he was witnessing something truly magical. Elias and Evelyn spent several long hours happily talking in her small, cozy parlor, tightly holding hands on the sofa as if they were young, nervous sweethearts all over again. They finally pieced together the deeply tragic misunderstanding of their youth. Evelyn's strict father had shockingly discovered their secret plan to meet at the Great Oak and had viciously forbidden her from leaving the house, forcefully packing her into a carriage that very afternoon. She had desperately bribed a loyal servant with her last coins to bury the metal box at the tree, praying Elias would find it. But the foolish servant had buried it far too deep, entirely hidden beneath the massive roots. When the sun finally began to set and it was time to leave, Elias absolutely refused to drive back to Willow Creek alone. He completely insisted and immediately arranged for Evelyn to pack her things and move back to Willow Creek, directly into the grand Blackwood estate, which suddenly didn't seem so dark, gloomy, or lonely anymore. But Elias absolutely did not forget the brave, kind-hearted boy who had brought the brilliant light back into his miserable life. The very next morning after they returned to Willow Creek, Elias visited Leo's small, drafty cottage. He sat comfortably at the wobbly wooden dining table with Clara and Leo. "Clara," Elias said, his deep voice incredibly respectful, warm, and clear. Your wonderful son has miraculously given me back my life, my shattered heart, and my entire future. I possess immense wealth, but until yesterday afternoon, I was truthfully the poorest man in this entire town. I want to sincerely help you. I completely insist on paying for Leo's education, all the way through the finest university he wishes to attend. And I would be deeply, truly honored if you would accept a highly paid position managing my entire estate. I promise you, you will never have to scrub another person's dirty floor again. Clara was completely, wonderfully overwhelmed. Thick tears of immense gratitude and relief streamed down her tired face as she repeatedly thanked Mr. Blackwood. In a single extraordinary day, the difficult lives of a struggling poor mother and son, alongside two incredibly lonely, heartbroken souls, were entirely, permanently transformed. In the wonderful years that quickly followed, the Blackwood estate rapidly became the most joyful, welcoming house in all of Willow Creek. The heavy iron gates were permanently left wide open for everyone. The beautiful sounds of children's laughter and lively music constantly echoed from the magnificent blooming gardens. Elias and Evelyn spent their golden years completely devoted to one another, deeply cherishing every single moment, making up for all the precious time they had lost. And little Leo grew up into a remarkably fine, highly educated young man, always remaining incredibly close to the loving couple who treated him exactly like their very own grandson. The old great oak tree continued to stand incredibly tall on the highest hill, its massive branches swaying gently and peacefully in the autumn wind. But it was no longer a tragic symbol of lost love and buried, forgotten secrets. It became a powerful, beautiful symbol of enduring hope for the entire town. You see, my dear friends, life can sometimes feel deeply, painfully unfair. We might face terrible misunderstandings. We might feel completely abandoned by those we love, and we might be heavily tempted to build thick walls of solid ice around our fragile hearts, simply to protect ourselves from the agonizing pain of the world. We might look at the difficult people around us who seem cold, distant, or cruel, and completely forget that they are very often carrying a heavy, invisible, crushing burden of sorrow. But Leo, with his worn-out boots and empty pockets, showed us all the incredible, unstoppable power of a pure, courageous heart. He absolutely did not let the fearful rumors of a grumpy, terrifying old man stop him from bravely doing what he knew was right. He approached a dark, intimidating situation with pure kindness, and in doing so, he dug up far more than just an old, rusted metal box. He beautifully dug up a miracle. And that, my dear friends, is exactly why a kind, brave heart is always worth far more than all the shining gold in the entire world. No matter how much time has tragically passed, it is truly never too late for the truth. It is never too late for beautiful forgiveness, and it is certainly never, ever too late for love. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to Nanny Granny's Golden Tales for more timeless tales and endless wisdom. And tell me in the comments, what lesson did you learn from today's story?